I'm a little reluctant to tell this story because, well, I've never been able to make sense of it, and it has haunted me for years now. The event happened in 1997, 5 months before the birth of my firstborn. I was not always the outdoorsman type. Even though I would enjoy fishing, I would always stay close to populated areas and fish for a couple of hours with friends. At some point or another, I had met a new acquaintance who in fact was a hunting and fishing fanatic. He was the type of guy that just made you want to experience this wonderful lifestyle. And after months of listening to his hunting and fishing stories, I found myself fond of the outdoors, thinking about maybe going out on my own for an overnight camping extravaganza. I began buying camping equipment, and my friend had given me an easy-to-assemble one-man tent and some gear he was no longer using. I had no idea as to where to camp, but wanted to step out of my comfort zone and test myself by getting off the beaten track. And my friend had mentioned a place that was a 3-hour drive from my house, and even gave me instructions on how to get there. So I chose a day to depart and made sure everybody knew where I was going. Just in case, of course. I arrived at my destination at about 10 a.m. The area was heavily wooded, and I was amazed at the scenery and was quite excited to get to the lake and set up camp. The area I was in was just outside the Lake Simon Indian Reserve in Quebec. Now, just before I had arrived, I stopped in a store not far from my turnoff to my camping area. I entered the store, proceeded to ask the clerk how long it would be to reach my site. I showed him on the map, and he asked me immediately if I had a hunting rifle. I asked him why, and from the back of the store, a man called out to the clerk, "Mind your own business," in French. I found the whole encounter kind of strange, but whatever. Brushed it off and headed out on my own way. I arrived at said location about 15 minutes later, simply parked my truck, and proceeded to walk yet another 20 minutes to the lake itself. I began scouting out my camp area and found a spot that seemed most suitable. Now, after setting up my tent and finding firewood, I decided to try my luck fishing, but nothing was biting. So, I decided then to walk around the lake and try my luck elsewhere. I fished all day but had absolutely no luck. So, I decided to go back to my tent and start setting up for the evening. The following hours after the sunset was the beginning of a strange experience that still haunts me to this day. You see, I had finished eating supper and decided to roast some marshmallows that I bought at the store earlier that morning. I walked to where the woods were behind my tent to find a stick, and as I approached, I suddenly stopped in my tracks and packed up, and I heard a noise that could only be described as a growl. I'm not afraid to say that I was immediately scared and wondering what could be making this sound, and also at the same time, how would I protect myself? I only had a small knife and my hatchet was back by the tent, so I stood there trying to focus with only a little bit of light from the moon and my fire, and suddenly, I heard a thump from behind, right near the tent. I was not certain what to do at this time, but I knew something was close, and it managed to work its way around me. I mustered up all my courage, spun around, and right in time, I heard a growl from behind me again, and then something big running away through the woods. I had to calm myself down. My heart was beating so fast, and I was unable to think. I ran back to my tent, grabbed the hatchet, crouched down, and pulled the flaming stick out of the fire, holding it up like a torch. And that is when I heard a snapping sound in the woods to my left. I don't know how to explain the kind of fear that overtook me at this time. It was primal. I can only say that I will never forget that feeling of being alone in the woods, with something growling and circling me in the dark. I began talking to myself, weighing my options, and at the same time calling myself stupid for being in this position and maybe living out the last moments alone in the dark. I snapped myself out of it. And now, I needed a plan. Going in the tent was simply out of the question. There was no way I was going to sit in there wondering what's walking around outside, so I decided to stay by the fire, keep it burning till morning, and then leave at first light, immediately. I don't know how long I was standing there before I heard what can only be described as a dog whimpering. I had to stop in my tracks and not move at all and try to listen. There it was again. A whimpering sound coming from the same direction of the snap that I had heard earlier. What did I get myself into? I thought to myself and wondering, why is there whimpering in the woods to my left? And suddenly, I heard a commotion like branches breaking and snarling. What is out there? And then the whimpering again. I do not know why I began to approach the area where the sounds were coming from, but call me crazy. I just, for some reason, felt compelled. I realized as I was approaching that I was holding my breath. Come on, Rick, I said to myself. Breathe. I kept pushing, slowly pushing away the bushes and walking towards the whimpering sounds emanating only a few yards away. And I now stepped over a down tree, and suddenly I saw what was making the whimpering noise. On the ground, 3 feet away from me, was a large black or gray dog, I thought. But it wasn't a dog because it was simply too huge. It was strange looking, but I no longer felt this overwhelming fear from within. We looked at each other and seemed to have this mutual understanding, and I felt a calming sensation wash over my entire body. There was still no way I was going any further than just as soon as I said that to myself, this thing got up and slowly approached. And that's when I noticed its paw was stuck in some sort of trap. It fell back down and let out a whimper, staring up at me. I felt an immediate need to help this animal, albeit strange, and it was obvious that it was in pain. I approached slowly with my hands in front, telling this animal that I just want to help. And as I approached, the animal made no attempt to act violent or hostile, or to get up or back away. It was almost like it instinctively knew I was here to help. So I bent down and looked at this metal contraption. It was old and rusted, and as I followed the chain, I noticed it was looped around a small tree with some sort of spike driven through the links of the chain and into the tree. I decided to try to force the trap open with the stick, but this proved difficult, and I was trying not to hurt the animal in the process. Finally, I was able to pry the clamps open enough for the animal to pull its paw out. I tried to look at the injured paw, but I was still a little hesitant and figured I had done everything I could within my power to help this animal. So I slowly turned around and began walking back to my tent, feeling exhausted and depleted. I got back to my tent and immediately sat down. I was spent, feeling extremely tired. All of a sudden, I decided to get some sleep before sunrise, and I knew I had a long drive home and really needed the rest. I was bent over arranging my sleeping bag in my tent when I had a distinct feeling that something was behind me. I slowly turned around, and standing a few feet away from the fire was that dog I had helped earlier. The first thing that struck me was the size of this animal. It was impressive, and I still could not figure out what kind of dog this was. Was it a wolf? It was bigger than a wolf. Was it maybe a wild dog or a feral dog? I couldn't wrap my mind around this. All I knew was that this animal was big and could surely end me if it really wanted to. And so I watched it as it slowly walked towards the edge of the water and began to drink. It seemed to not be concerned with my presence, and I felt no fear like before. I was too tired, and I needed sleep. So I simply crawled into my tent and immediately passed out. Well, I woke up, looking at my watch, and incredibly had somehow slept a full 9 hours. It was now close to 1 p.m. in the afternoon. I began packing up my gear, and as I approached the water to rinse my utensils, I noticed huge paw prints in the sand leading toward the woodline. And I stood there for a minute and continued packing my gear. I arrived at my truck and felt a huge sense of relief. What a night, I had mumbled to myself and put the truck in drive, heading back home. Now, this is a very important part of the story. So, as I reached the main road, I noticed I needed gas and decided to gas up at the store where I had stopped the day prior. So I pulled up to the pumps, asked the kid outside to put in $25 of gas, and proceeded to go use the restroom that's inside the store. Pretty typical, right? Well, here's where it gets weird. I walked out of the restroom and made my way to the counter to pay for my fuel and get a pack of smokes. The cashier told me it was $7, and I told her she was forgetting the $25 in gas, and that is when she informed me that a man came in after me and paid for my gas. I stood there confused and not understanding why somebody would pay for my gas. I told her that somebody made a mistake and paid my bill by accident, but no, She insisted that there was no mix-up, and the man specifically pointed at my truck and said he wanted to cover the cost of my fuel. I grabbed my smokes and headed towards the door and stopped. Turning towards her, and I asked, "What did he look like?" She tells me he was hard to miss. About 6'2", long black hair with some gray in it. And she said she also noticed that he had a bandage on his left hand, that his hand had been injured recently. She also made note that she was positive he was native. And before I got to the door, she stopped me and said, "You must know him because he told me to tell you. Thank you." I got back in my truck, looking around to see if I could spot him. I was totally confused. I did not see him anywhere. But I continued on. And as I was driving home, I tried to put the previous 24 hours out of my mind, but to this day, I still try to make sense of this experience, but just end up with more questions than answers. November 1999. Location: between Longview, Texas and Shreveport, Louisiana, just off Interstate 20. After leaving government-private consulting, my wife let me know it's time to go home to Florida. So, she and the kids took a plane while I packed up the house and drove the Suburban to Florida. Leaving West Texas, heading on East I-20, a long drive. But by the time I got to Longview, I was ready for a late dinner, so I stopped at a dinner off the interstate. After dinner, I had planned to drive to Shreveport before calling it a night. There's a cheap casino and hotels, and I should have stayed in Longview. Now, quick note, the trip between Longview and Shreveport is heavily forested, very dark, lots of deer and other miscellaneous wildlife. So here I am driving 70 miles an hour, towing a car on a trailer. Probably wasn't the best idea at midnight. And all at once, 4 deer come bounding across the road, and so I braked hard, barely missing them, but flew off the highway and almost lost the trailer. Well, I get out and check the trailer and the Suburban. I'd blown the front tires, and the trailer tires too. But, luckily, I had spares for both and my floor jacks and tools. It shouldn't take more than an hour, I thought. So, I began to pull the jack out and the tools, and that's when a loud crashing came through the tree line. Alright, now, this made me jump, and 2 more deer came barreling out of the trees not even 20 feet away from me, and a second later, so did this large, hairy, dark brown creature hot on their heels. In fact, it didn't even seem to notice me as he caught a deer with one hand and broke its neck. Holy crap, I just stood watching thinking, what's even going on? There's no place to go. The creature simply turned around, slinging this 300-pound deer over its shoulder like it's nothing, and took 2 steps before actually seeing me in the vehicles, letting out a low growl, and then a louder, deep scream. And this was so loud it made me fall back on my butt, holding my chest, just staring at me. And I figured, this is it, I'm completely dead. I've been around these creatures before, but it's never been this scary. But this was different, and now I was a threat to its actual food source. And so I'm terrified now, starting to mumble and trying to speak to let him know I'm sorry. I just wrecked, I didn't mean to be here, just let me go. And I'm babbling and freaking out, and finally, I realized I had no option. I closed my eyes and accepted whatever comes, comes. And I'm not sure how long I kept my eyes closed, but when I opened them, he or it was gone. So I slowly got up and carefully looked around, and then started yanking my tools and jack and spare tires as fast as I could because I wasn't going anywhere unless the job was done. Now, as I'm changing the trailer tire, I heard a noise, and I look off in the direction, and right at the edge of the tree line, I saw the creature peeking around a tree watching me. It was dark, but I could very well make out the outline and the shining yellow eyes. I'm glad I left the headlights on. I began praying and working faster to finish. And then I heard chirping, and more chirping from another direction. Oh no. I got the trailer tire finished, but still had the Suburban tire to change. And that's when I felt something behind me. So, out of reaction, I slowly turned around, and just in front of the trees nearest me stood a smaller creature, not 10 feet away, simply just staring. And then I noticed another bigger one standing next to the tree behind the small one, the mother and child right here watching me. The large male was still half behind the tree to my right. and I'm about to be dessert to these things' dinner. So, slowly stood up, moving the flat tire out of the way, and then dragging my jack and tools to my Suburban. All the while keeping an eye on all three of these things, praying they would let me change the Suburban tire and get out of there. Now, once I began jacking it up, I heard another chirping sound and then a dragging sound, trying my best to just change the tire and not notice what was going on, but I couldn't help it. I looked up and saw my flat trailer tire was now gone. I nearly tore the knuckles off my hand trying to get the lug nuts off so fast, and as I pulled the flat off and started working on the spare, my heart stopped. The smaller one was now standing 5 feet away, looking down at the flat tire I had just pulled. The male was now standing much closer, watching the little one. Too afraid to look for the female, which I guessed was the mother, I just kept on praying and cranking on those lugs, tightening them. Not exactly sure how I was going to be able to get up and get in the Suburban without scaring the male, thinking I was moving to hurt the younger one. As I finished now, I said low and steady, "Can I get up and leave now?" And the little one picked up my flat tire and walked back to the trees with it. I could hear it bouncing in the trees and what sounded like a giggle. When I looked at the male, he turned and walked back to the trees. Never saw the female again. I got in and started the engine, slowly pulling onto the highway. And I never noticed in all that 30 minutes, never once saw another car on that lonely, dark highway. In fact, I drove on to Shreveport at 55 miles an hour, got a room at a hotel casino, went to the bar, had 4 shots, 10 cigarettes, and decided to call my wife. And I told her, "Honey, I just can't seem to get away from my job, even when I try." Honestly, having an encounter with a family of Bigfoot did not end in disaster, but it absolutely is the highlight of all my experiences. But a sad note for you, a year later, a buddy of mine still working on the project told me this. 2 hunters, father and son, shot what they thought was a bear, but it turned out to be this 6-foot-tall bipedal creature. After discovering their mistake, they were attacked by something large, both hospitalized with severe injuries. He further stated this, that a team was deployed to the area and found 2 very large aggressive creatures, one male, one female. The team was forced to terminate both of them. I can only assume that that family that I encountered that night is now deceased. Well, this was back in the year 1998, and I lived in a place called Cranbrook, BC. I lived out at a trailer court called Trask. It was 12 miles out of town. And one day, my girlfriend says I left my car in town and would you give me a ride to town following me back home? And so I told her, well, as long as you don't leave me because this car doesn't run too well and it's 30 below. And I don't want to stall out and be stuck freezing to death in the winter while you're home happy. She agreed that she would wait for me, so we're driving and we went back about 4 miles before my house, and she slows down to the dead goat that I saw on the road, right on the side, and that's right when we went to town. See, there was this man standing over the dead body. He was quite a tall man. I could see it from the distance, and I think she was worried about maybe running him over, and then all of a sudden she speeds up and took off. And I'm thinking, what are you doing? You were told not to leave me behind. So I got closer to the man standing there, and I rolled down my car window, and as I was going to ask if you needed help, and that's when I noticed that this, what appeared to be a naked kind of man with light fur, not heavy, standing over this dead goat, and he lifts up his head, looks at me, and begins sniffing the air. And then he bends down and starts eating this goat. Well, I just about lost it and crapped my pants. And I floored it on the gas, and I'm like, car, do not film me now. And I'm praying to God to get out of there and just keep on going. And I'm going so fast just before turning into the trash trailer court, and the front of my car kisses the back of her bumper and spins her vehicle into the turn, and she gets right into the turn basically with me and right behind her. So I said to her, what was that we both saw? And she says, I don't even want to talk about it, nor do I not even want to know. And she just keeps saying, I don't want to talk about it, I don't want to talk about it. She was whiter than a ghost. And I said, I'm going to write this down because I'm going to ask you tomorrow what it was you saw, and I want to write down every detail. So I I went home, I got a piece of paper, and I wrote down every detail. I couldn't spell well, so I tape recorded it, and then I played the tape recording to her the next day, and she said that's exactly what I saw. So how can this be? And I said, I don't know. But obviously it was real, and boy oh boy, was this more than real. This thing got my scent, and the next night, I swear I could hear this thing howling, and I mean, not like howling like a dog in a movie, but howling like I never heard before. It was worse. It was blood-curdling. My boyfriend was so scared, he went home and left me and my 2 little children, basically with the rest of the camp people, while the trailer court by myself and my trailer was more towards the woods. Lucky me, I didn't remember about the bottom of my trailer being open, but this thing crawled underneath my trailer. I mean, I could hear something down there, and then in my bedroom was at the very end where the floor begins to move up and down like something's going to break right through the bottom of the floor. It's got carpet on, and I'm thinking, how safe is this floor exactly? I mean, how thick is the floor? I have a lump in the middle of my floor by my bed. I remembered that my son was playing with the railroad tie nails that we had, which is 2 of them. And so I ran, got that and the hammer, and I placed it and drove it in as hard as I could with the hammer, and I heard a squeal on the other side and yelled, I gotta get out of here. That I hit one, and then I hit it with another one and heard it scream again, and it took off. And when it took off, the nails that were driven to the carpet had blood on them, probably about 2.5 inches deep, so I know that I got it really good. And then I found my girlfriend's father, and I said, bring your gun and bring a darn good gun. And he tells me I can't leave the gun there, and I tell him, you need to leave the gun here because if this thing tries to get underneath my floor again, I'm gonna shoot it right through the floor. Well, he wasn't sure what I hit with a nail, but he said it could have been a human being, it could have been an animal, and tells me I might kill somebody, but I don't care. It's underneath my floorboard, raising my carpet up, and I know what it is, because I seen it. And he went out back, sealed up where he had gotten it, and he could see the footprints. And he actually sees these footprints and says, these are not human feet prints. I told him I know, and I was convinced this was a werewolf of some kind, or some kind of wolf-human hybrid. After that, I took me and the kids and we went and stayed at their place after that, for the night being, and then the next day came, where me and my kids and my girlfriend came back. We had the gun with us, but then she had to go to town, so she took the guns with her, and that's when all of this stuff started again. And so this time I get on the phone and I tell them, you need to get out here immediately. And so I tell her to get out here with those guns. Something's trying to get in the door, the back door, and I had sealed us off for the winter, thank God. It was locked, but the handle began to rattle violently. So I grabbed my horse lead and I tied it to the bathroom door, which was right across from the door, and I tied it very tight. So every time that it tried to pull the other door, it was pulling the bathroom door, till about 45 minutes later. My friend comes down the driveway and she sees it run. It was at least 8 feet tall, and she says it was the same weird thing she saw, plain as day in the headlights. Well, I stayed at her dad's place again this time for a week, and then devised a plan. I told her, I'm not going back there. I'm not taking my children back there. I'm going to go get my stuff, pack it up, and I'm leaving you to do like when you were going. And I said, I'm moving out of Cranbrook. I found my sister in Vernon and said, do you have a room for me and the kids, because we're moving right now, and this is why I moved to Vernon. So this move happened so fast, less than 10 days, I even had the trailer sold to another person for rent. I was now gone. It was quite peaceful for many years. And then I had my new fifth wheel living at my mom's place, and that's when I felt like something was staring at me, lurking there in the darkness. It bothered me, and one morning I saw fresh tracks in the snow. Dog tracks, but the tracks were wrong. Normally when you find dog tracks, they're quadrupedal. They move in sets of 4, but this was bipedal, meaning on 2 feet, and they were quite large. And so I decided to follow these all the way to my mom's garage, where they turn into humans' feet. And I showed this to my mom and my neighbor in disbelief, and the other neighbor, and they all agreed that this is very weird. And so I forwarded this all the way up to these people's house, not too far away, when I knocked on their door and asked the people there if they have any little children living here. The person responded that they do have a grandchild, and this kid peeked up from behind her. And so I asked this woman at the door if she had any grandchildren, to which she looked at me strangely. and I showed her the tracks and told her, if it appears back in the yard again, I'm going to shoot it. She continued to look at me strangely, and that's when I think she understood what I meant. I told her that I know what it's from, and I know that you know what it's from, and told her that I suggest you find somewhere else to roam. And then after that, I moved away from my mom's house. I have no idea why I even saw these types of things in my life. What could it mean? Is this some strange type of supernatural occurrence? I don't understand. I've come into contact with a lot of strange things, human and not, in my life, and I don't know why, but it leaves a very strange impression on you and makes you feel very leery of walking around in the bush or near it. Maybe the bush is their territory. I mean, that's what I figured all along. Maybe I should just stay out of it completely. And that's what I do now. Quite well, actually. And that's my story. My name is Rhonda. Thank you. My Tlingit name is Soonclaw. My name was given to me by my maternal great-grandmother, and it means dream mother, or mother of all dreams. My Yupik name is Adukuk, given to me by my paternal great-aunt, one of the last shamans/healers in the northwest Alaska of the 20th century, and it means to wait, or one who waits. See, my heritage has shamans/healers running in both my Tlingit and Yupik ancestry. See, I am also a direct descendant of Chief Shakes of the 7th Wrangell, Alaska. Tlingits and Yupiks believe every living being has a spirit that deserves respect. We also acknowledge that there are creatures and beings that may never be understood, but that does not mean we should underestimate them or assume that we as humans are superior. Tlingits have stories of creatures similar to the Wendigo or the Skinwalker. It's known as the Kushtaka. Like with Wendigos or Skinwalkers, it's not good to say or think about their name or the creatures themselves because you'd be calling them to you. Kushtaka can shapeshift, and they like to psychologically torture their victims and mimic their victim or a person the victim cares about a lot. They are maliciously and viciously clever. Kushtaka are not created by a curse. In fact, they are creatures that inhabit the wilderness and the unknown, or what can be called the spirit world. They are also attracted to people with supernatural or spiritual abilities, or people that are open or sensitive. The Kushtaka can be outwitted and even defeated, but it's better to put your energy into evading them. People have used their mimicry against them to escape, but most do not. After the Kushtaka is done messing with the victim's mind to their breaking point, they either spirit the victims away into the dark realm or devour them, or both. You do not want to even be on the same island as these creatures. They are dark. I had one encounter with one in Sitka, Alaska, when I was 13. It was one of the trials I had to go through because I'm a shaman, and I had to face 3 trials before I could be considered a shaman. First, being born with the ability to feel, see, interact with the spiritual beings and the spirits of living people. Basically, I'm what's known as an empath. I can feel what another person's feeling and even sense what they are thinking. Think of it as I have antennae that receive and feel everything's frequencies. Second, face death or died. I died whilst being born. I was 3 weeks late and had been dead a few minutes and revived without aid from the medical personnel at the Indian Hospital Service Hospital. 3, face true pure evil and successfully survived the encounter both physically, emotionally, and spiritually. This was my first truly life-ending dangerous encounter with a spiritual entity. Shamans must face true evil so that they can recognize evil along their path of helping others. And 4, this quality of a shaman isn't required but does help. Having a spiritual guardian partner, a spiritual being that had chosen you, helps with spiritual work and guides you to answers to questions or issues that cannot be addressed with another human being. I met mine when I was about 4. He's always around me, helps keep spirits away from me to lessen my exposure to their energy. The energy spirits give off is not good and not compatible with living beings. I think of it as a form of radiation almost. Working with spirits/beings has cost me a lot of my health. My health is also sacrificed when I help heal others, so I can only help with healing someone or take their pain away when it's truly needed. I can give people my energy, and conversely take energy away. Not that that's good to do. And I can take a person's pain into myself. Regarding my work with spirits, I help lost spirits cross over, or I can banish them. Although I try not to banish any because it's comparable to taking a life. I mostly work with spirits whilst I'm dreaming. I know, that sounds cheesy, right? Ridiculous. It's hard for me to describe what I do, but think of it as, while I'm in the dream state, I'm in another plane of existence. Kind of like astral projection. It's quite tiring because I'm always conscious. I'm always aware and perceiving what's going on, so I hardly ever have truly restful sleep. I suggest you take a second to consider that. I hardly have truly restful sleep. Even when I'm dreaming, I'm fully aware and I'm helping the spirits that come to me or am visited by family members or that have passed on. It's tiring. People assume that having supernatural abilities and interacting with spirits would be cool or neat, but there is a big cost. It costs me energy, effort, and my health, and I'm in a sense always in a wakeful state of mind. I know most people won't believe me and will doubt my sanity for being blunt about my abilities, and of course, having an encounter with a cryptid. In a way, it amuses me how the Western culture is in complete denial about spirits, creatures, and what's considered a myth. Anyway, Alaska is beautiful and brutal. Nature and the universe is beautiful and brutal. And we treat everything, whether they're natural or what's considered supernatural, with respect, care, and caution when needed. My encounter with the Kushtaka happened while I was 13 and living in Sitka, Alaska. FYI, I'm 13. I woke up suddenly, about 3 a.m. It's not the devil's hour, it's just a time all spiritual beings are more potent. And I felt an overwhelming urge to walk into the forest. Sitka is enveloped by the Tongass National Rainforest. It's an extremely dense rainforest of tall cedars and spruces. The ground's covered in spongy-like soil and moss. Feet always feel like they're sinking a bit into the ground. Knee-high ferns, fallen tree limbs, and thick roots crisscross everywhere. And Devil's Club grows all over the place. Devil's Club is a ginseng plant that has big spikes along the whole stem and underneath their very big wide leaves. Its sap is very irritating to skin and stings painfully for hours and days, even after getting scratched from their half-inch long spikes. It didn't feel odd to me that I was going into the forest in the middle of the night. I did not even stop to get a flashlight. The moon was around 3/4 full, so it was pretty light where the canopy allowed it to shine through. And after about 2 miles, I felt it. My entire soul was flooded with utter dread, and I stopped, looked up, since I have a habit of looking down at my feet to watch where I'm stepping, not with my head first. And the first thing I saw were a pair of glowing eyes almost 3 feet above me, and I saw a vague form of a massive body. It was about 8 feet tall, and then I heard and felt its growl. My chest vibrated with it. It was about 15 feet ahead of me, and I just knew that I was facing a Kushtaka. I froze. I don't know for how long, but it felt like minutes and minutes. Luckily, my guardian or partner yelled at me to run, and that broke me out of my trance that was way beyond fear, and I was frozen right in that spot. And right as the Kushtaka began to lunge at me, I ran. And keep in mind, I was not walking on a path. I haphazardly meandered around, but my helper or partner must have helped me run back home, because I don't think it was a coincidence or a luck that I happened to run the 2 or so miles back to where my home was in the dark. And I remember feeling the pine needles and Devil's Club plants harshly brushing against me and snagging my hair out. I remember feeling the ground thump with every single one of the Kushtaka's steps, and I remember breathing so hard that it felt like my throat was going to bleed because the air felt like sandpaper grinding against my throat as I took each breath. And the whole time I hadn't even said anything aloud, but my breathing sounded like short bursts or screams because that was how hard I was running. I know my guide aided me to not trip on anything, because before I faced the Kushtaka, I had to struggle from tripping on fallen limbs, tree roots, and little sinkholes the entire time I was walking. Yet, I didn't a single time, as I was blindly sprinting away from the abomination that was chasing close behind me. Now, as I got out of the forest and clumsily slowed my steps as I got to my home, I finally took a chance to look behind me. and I saw only the glowing eyes staying at the forest line. I threw up a little before I shakily climbed back into my bedroom window, and I just recall trying not to breathe any of it back into my lungs because I was still breathing very hard. I was so afraid I was going to feel claws or bites sinking into my legs after I hoisted my torso inside. I didn't even care about the metal window pane adding even more scratches and bruises onto my body as I'm yanking myself over, and it snatched my legs inside. After I got back in my bedroom, I turned around to close my window and shut the curtains, and right as I was closing the curtains, the glowing eyes were now level with mine, and my home was a bit above the ground, right? So I'm squeezing my eyes shut, tears streaming down my face, and my voice was croaky as I said to it that it does not belong here and it's not allowed inside to my home or to ever follow me. And after this encounter, I had insomnia for the first time in my life. It lasted a few good months, and I'd get maybe 3 hours of sleep a night. I never went back into that national rainforest alone again. I'd only go if I was with more than 6 people, and if the guys I hung out with were going in with their dirt bikes or trucks. The way the Tlingits see things is everything has a soul, a spirit, and we do not own the land. Humans never owned anything and never will. The land is theirs. The beasts, the creatures, the beings, the spirits, the elementals, etc. We have to live with or among them. So please, keep your children safe. Children with special needs are more open and vulnerable to spirits and supernatural beings, as seen in many missing cases. That about ends my story. I hope you take what I had to say seriously.